Mr. Louis Chua.
Question 35.
Mr. Speaker, with your permission, I will address questions 35 to 38 from the order paper number 109 relating to People's Association's audit findings from the AGO for the financial year 2022 and 2023 together.
Please proceed.
Thank you, sir. Sir, this reply will also address PQs 4847, 4871, 4908 and 4945, filed for subsequent sittings by Dr. Tan Wu Ming, Mr. Saktiandi Supat, Mr. Leong Man Wai, and Ms. Joan Pereira. So let me start by setting out some background to the nature of the transactions audited by the AGO. Grassroots organizations have always played an important role in enabling the government's efforts to support residents by raising awareness of, and in some cases, directly administering national schemes, such as the CDC voucher schemes on the ground. Each year, GROs help to administer about 3 to 4 national schemes across all constituencies. Many GROs will be activated to support the administration of these schemes, which typically involves processing at least 260,000 such applications each year. Over the years, GROs have also initiated their own local welfare assistance schemes to provide assistance to their residents having regard to the specific needs of their local demographic, which these GROs assess. These local schemes complement the national schemes, often helping those who fall through the cracks. In total, these local schemes benefit at least 400,000 residents annually across Singapore. The assistance and support from the government, the GROs, and community partners have had a real impact on the livelihood of our population. For instance, the cash distributions initiated by GROs and community partners help low-income households alleviate the increased expenses during festive seasons as they prepare for celebration with their families. Heartland hawkers and merchants were able to obtain relief from the pandemic and rising costs of living with the CDC voucher scheme, and they could not have done so without the prompt reimbursement of the voucher schemes facilitated by the GROs. Sir, there are about 2,000 GROs across Singapore, assisting to operationalize both the national and the local schemes that I've outlined. And they do so by raising awareness and identifying eligible households, assessing the applications, including from those who might marginally miss the criteria of these schemes or require some form of additional assistance. PA staff and volunteers are then mobilized to extend the last-mile support under these schemes by directly administering the distribution of welfare assistance or vouchers from the government or community partners. In doing so, PA staff and volunteers have developed a good understanding of the ground needs and often had to be flexible as well to render timely assistance to the residents. Mr. Saktiandi Supat asked about the proportion of GROs that were audited by the AGO. As I said, there are about 2,000 GROs across Singapore. Each year, the AGO decides on which organization it wishes to audit, and this includes the GROs, and how many it wishes to audit. AGO also retains discretion to determine the areas to be covered in its audit and the approach to take. For financial year 22 and 23 audit of PA, AGO chose to audit welfare assistance schemes for the period 1st April 2019 to 31st May 2022, a large part of which coincided with the COVID-19 pandemic. In its audit, 2 GROs were identified to have adopted inappropriate practices in the management of monies. I will explain to members now the facts of these 2 cases. The first case concerned the management of monies for welfare distribution at festive events by one GRO. Welfare distributions to low-income residents at festive events are a form of local welfare assistance schemes initiated by the GROs, often in collaboration with community partners. This, as I said, complements national schemes in rendering support to the vulnerable. Such schemes are not uncommon, and most GROs would have their own local schemes to address the specific local needs of each constituency. In auditing the disbursement procedure of this scheme, AGO found that a cross-check was issued to a staff member. When the check was brought to the bank by the staff member, it would be processed and the amount would be deposited into the staff member's bank account. The staff member would then withdraw the deposited amount in cash over the bank counter, accompanied by one other staff member. Verification of the cash withdrawn would be performed by a third staff member not involved in the cash withdrawal. Throughout this process, the deposit and withdrawal would be tagged to the individual responsible in PA's financial accounting system that is used by all GROs to account for receipts and payments. The monies withdrawn were then distributed to the scheme recipients with proper record and accounting of the amounts given out. Mr. Yip Hon Wing asked what the standard procedure would otherwise have been. Sir, the standard procedure would have been to do all of the above, except one step, which is for the check to be an uncrossed one made out to the staff's member with the words "or bearer" crossed out. When the uncrossed check is brought to the bank, the cash would then be withdrawn immediately over the counter and retained by the staff concerned and then applied to the scheme for disbursement. So that would have been the usual step. There are a few notable points from this case. First, whilst this was not the right procedure, the staff concerned explained that it was thought that the additional step in using the cross-check was taken to better account for the money, and that was why that step was taken. Second, the monies withdrawn were duly checked and verified through the process by multiple and different staff members. Third, all the amounts deposited, withdrawn, and distributed were properly recorded and accounted for. AGO has reviewed the records and found no evidence of loss or misappropriation of monies in this case. The practice ceased once AGO noted this observation in the course of its audit. The second case concerned the reimbursement of monies to the hawkers and merchants under the CDC voucher scheme at one GRO. The CDC voucher scheme was launched by PA in 2020 to help lower-income households defray their cost of living and at the same time support hawkers and heartland merchants who were affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. At that time, GROs helped to administer the scheme by distributing the physical vouchers to the low-income households, as well as thereafter facilitating the reimbursement of voucher claims from the hawkers and merchants. The period in question coincided with the time when cash flow of hawkers and merchants was seriously affected by the COVID-19 pandemic and various other measures, including safe management measures. The GRO in question thus saw a need to set up a system which could facilitate a prompt claims process for the hawkers and merchants under the scheme. For this case, AGO found that the process took place as follows. Staff collected the used physical vouchers from the hawkers and merchants and tabulated the amount to be reimbursed to each of them on a weekly basis. The transaction volume was high, with most of the claims of small amounts at around $20 to $30. And members will recall that this first iteration of the CDC voucher schemes was entirely physical. Physical vouchers were used. To facilitate these reimbursements, a cross-check would be issued by the GRO to the relevant staff member's name, who would withdraw cash and then reimburse the hawkers and merchants using this cash withdrawn. When the hawkers and merchants received the monies from the staff, they would indicate their receipt of the cash by signing against the listings prepared by the staff member. Similar to the first case, the process deviated from the standard procedure in that a cross-check was issued instead of an uncrossed check, and the monies went through the staff member's personal bank account briefly. This was not the correct procedure. However, there were proper records and accounting of all the claims and the disbursement of monies. AGO has reviewed the records and found no evidence of loss or misappropriation of funds, as in the first case. This arrangement ceased with the changes to the CDC voucher scheme in 2021 December, when electronic vouchers were introduced in place of physical ones. Sir, to address Ms. Herting-Roos, Mr. Louis Strauss, and Ms. Joan Pereira's questions, subsequent to the AGO's audit, PA has been undertaking checks similar in scope to the AGO audit and in respect of the same period. Thus far, we have identified 3 other cases in which similar inappropriate practice of monies management for welfare assistance schemes were adopted. In all of these cases, there was also no loss of funds nor any malafides in staff conduct. These practices have also since stopped. Nonetheless, we do not take this for granted, and to Mr. Saktiandi Supat and Dr. Tan Wu Ming's questions, PA has taken note of the areas and observations by AGO and has counseled its staff and volunteers involved of the need to adhere strictly to governance processes. PA has also implemented and will continue to work on strengthening its internal governance and oversight of key processes. I would add that given the scale and volume of such transactions, which I had outlined to members earlier, PA recognizes that staff and volunteers do face challenges when administering welfare assistance schemes and other government programs, and at the same time managing administrative matters such as contracts and claims processes. PA will continue to identify ways to improve its structures, its systems, as well as its processes to mitigate such reoccurrence, but at the same time allow the GROs and its volunteers to do what it does best on the ground by delivering last-mile service direct to residents, helping them in times of need, and making sure, as you saw in the case of the welfare schemes during COVID, that cash flow, which was vital during COVID, was not affected. Mr. Sharil Taha, Ms. Hertingru, Mr. Saktiandi, Mr. Yip Honwing, and Mr. Leong Man Wai asked about PA's plans to strengthen compliance and prevent future occurrence. In recent years, PA has embarked on major structural changes and implemented measures to strengthen its key governance processes. These were to address risks that were observed through past AGO audit findings, as well as picked up through PA's regular internal audits and reviews. Going forward, PA will implement all of AGO's recommendations in the FY22 and 23 report. It has put in place a systematic plan that includes accelerating the full implementation of measures we had embarked on in recent years. Digitalizing manual processes to minimize the need for cash handling, refining financial procurement rules, and bolstering capabilities of staff and GROs and their volunteers in these areas. PA will also address the lapses identified and strengthen the monitoring and compliance to procedures and processes. In this respect, PA has also set up an independent review committee to review the latest AGO findings, independent from the existing staff and the internal audit team, to review the latest AGO findings and to ensure measures are put in to strengthen the system. The review committee will regularly report the progress of the implementation to the PA board as well as to MCCY. PA will update the public on its progress from time to time. PA takes the findings of AGO very seriously and will continue on taking the steps outlined above to address the gaps in the processes. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Louis Chua.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just 2 supplementary questions for the Minister. I think firstly, beyond the finance staff who actually authorized the transactions and the withdrawal, to what extent was this practice actually authorized by the management team of the PA or even the grassroots organizations? And I think if you look at the second part of my original parliamentary question, it's really in terms of were there any forms of disciplinary actions that are taken on the staff or involved in the transfer and even the management team, and whether there was any censure of the board as well. Thank you.
Minister Tong.
The relevant authorizations were all disclosed and properly recorded in the systems maintained by the GRO. And that, as I mentioned earlier, was precisely the reason why AGO was able to check and verify, based on these records, that no monies were missing at all. In relation to your question about follow-up steps for the staff and the volunteers, I've set them out in my response. We have outlined the importance, underscored the importance of adhering to this, counsel the relevant parties concerned to ensure that this does not occur again.
We are approaching the end of question time. I will allow for a few more clarifications, so keep it short and keep the answers short as well. Ms. Joan Pereira.
Thank you, Speaker. Minister, with the move towards digital payments for disbursement to reduce cash handling, what would be the impact on the elderly who may not own or have use of mobile devices? Second question, are there simpler ways to allow the use of PA or grassroots bank accounts for fund disbursement purposes and disallow the use of PA staff personal bank accounts for such purposes? Thank you.
Minister Edwin Tong.
Thank you, Ms. Pereira. The first question is a valid one. As we move towards ensuring that we undertake transactions digitally, there will be a constituency of persons, usually the elderly, who are not able to keep up and process the transactions in the same way. So what we do at PA is we always go with the mantra that we say it's digital first, but not digital only. So those of our seniors, our other residents who come and need assistance because they're unable to process or handle the transactions digitally, we will assist them in person, and in some cases, if necessary, we will help them to print the hard copies so that they will be able to administer. But at the same time, in our drive to ensure that we move towards digital transactions, our staff is also trained to counsel such people, to help them and try and get them on board the digital framework so that for future transactions, they'll be more equipped and more assured to be able to handle those transactions. To your second question, the proper process, as you've heard me outline, is indeed to avoid commingling with the staff's bank account. In this case, what happened was the check was crossed and as a result had to be deposited in the staff's account. The usual process is for the checks to be uncrossed and for cash to be handled across the counter without entering the staff's bank account.
Ms. He Ting-Ru.
Thank you, Speaker. Two supplementary questions from me. First, I understand from the Minister's reply that there's an undertaking to be done to make certain checks that are similar in scope. Can he share, about the timeline for when this is expected to be completed, and also a bit more details about the scope in which, these checks, additional checks are going to be carried out? Secondly, on the details of the independent committee, would the ministry commit to eventually publishing a full report about its findings? And can I also ask about the composition of this committee? Who sits on the committee? Are they external to the PA or are they appointed from external sources? Thank you.
The committee has got one board member and other senior grassroots members who are not on the board and otherwise not connected to PA's senior management. And in relation to your point about whether we will make the findings public and publish a report, I will have a word with the review committee. The scope of its work is essentially to look at its current processes, give a view, and to really have a second pair of eyes. In most of these cases, it is not that the process is not set out. The process has been set out. There are SOPs, and in fact, that's why AGO was able to audit it and make these findings of inconsistency relative to what the SOP ought to be. But I will convey the point and discuss it with the review committee. Your first question, Ms. He, is the scope of the checks. The scope of the checks, as I said, will be similar to what AGO has done in terms of timing as well as the scope. Scope meaning the kind of transactions as well as having regard to the nature of the problems picked up. Obviously, as we do this, even as we focus on those transactions, the lessons learned can be adopted on a broader scale, such as commingling isn't just prohibited in the context of welfare assistance schemes, but also across the board. So those are lessons that we'll pick up from this review, but applied across a broader variety of different transactions.